So I'd like to introduce to you Vignesh Mahalingam, who has been with us for a few years after he finished his master's in Germany. So many of you are students of our lab, so you probably don't need much of an introduction to him. I've really enjoyed my partnership with him in the last few years, the wonderful discussions and on pretty much everything under the earth, under the sky and above the sky as well. So really thankful for Nature to have introduced him to me. And this is a very unique work that our lab has produced because we've never worked on biosystems earlier or molecular dynamics in particular to analyze that. So Vignesh has been kind of a pioneer in that as far as our lab is concerned. So I warmly welcome Vignesh to give this PhD colloquium. And I'd like to remind the audience that this particular colloquium is typically done prior to submitting the PhD thesis. Vignesh's work is already published in 2 high-quality journal articles. So the peers have reviewed it and have basically given a go-ahead for it. So in that sense, it is something that is of technical competence, but still, because it's just before the submission of the thesis, any inputs that come from you in terms of possibilities of improving it without much of a time commitment would be most welcome. So that's the whole purpose of the colloquium, is to invite the public opinion, especially the experts like Professor Mahipal, to see if anything can be done to further improvise on it. So all questions, doubts, suggestions are all welcome. Whether we take it forward or not depends on how much of time investment would be required, because we would like to submit this thesis as soon as possible. But nonetheless, anything that can help improve, or even for in terms of future work, because it will help Vignesh to look at what he can do in the future related to this particular work. So with these few words for both Vignesh and the audience, I welcome Vignesh to take over.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Let me start with the presentation directly. And let me go through the questions. If you have any questions, put it in the chat, and then we'll discuss all these questions. Welcome to the colloquium on the thermal phenomena in DNA and layered materials. So why DNA? So that will be a question that we'll be seeing. So first we'll see the previous computational works on DNA thermal transport. Then we'll see the experimental works done. I mean, very few experimental works have been done, and there has been some hiccups on these experiments as well. We'll see those things as well, and then we'll see why we went with our first work on the thermal conductivity in BDNA, and how what are the methods we employed to compute the thermal conductivity in BDNA, and then we'll see whether the base pairs have a strong effect on the overall thermal conductivity of DNA. And then we'll see a few conference works on layered materials and the thermal properties of a few layered materials. And then at the end, we'll see whether this field is still valid, or how this field is still being active. So we'll see such things as well. So let's see the previous computational works on the DNA thermal transport. So first we have to get to know the structures. So structure dictates function, right? So we have 3 types of DNA occurring in nature. I mean, conformal types. These conformal types are the aDNA, bDNA, and zDNA. The bDNA is the most common form of DNA, and it stays in hydrated form. It's surrounded by water, and it stays in hydrated form. And the aDNA, I mean, can stay. The transition from bDNA to aDNA can happen if water is removed and it becomes more dehydrated. So the aDNA is the dehydrated form of DNA, and the zDNA is a left helical DNA, which is completely different from the aDNA and the bDNA. The basic things of DNA are the diameter, the helix diameter of the DNA. It has a double-stranded. We are discussing the double-stranded form. Single-stranded DNAs also exists, but we discuss the double-stranded DNA form, which has a helical pitch of 34 angstroms, and there are 10 base pairs per turn. Between one node and the consequent node, and there are two grooves called the major groove and the minor groove. So you can read the paper in the bottom. It's a fantastic paper. So many things, you can get to know many things from that. So next we discuss how DNA was modeled initially. So Peyrard and Bishop, so what they did was they created a single coordinate model. So then, what a single coordinate model is like, it will be the whole DNA, which has an helical structure, will be taken into a single coordinate structure as a set of beads connected by a set of springs. So one set of springs will have an interaction between them. So using something called a Morse potential, the hydrogen between the base strands, the interaction is modeled by using a Morse potential. And then we have what is called an harmonic potential, so which will decide the stacking between the base pairs. And what you see in the bottom is the harmonic form of the potential. So you see the coordinate between two subsequent beads, and then and it's squared, right? So this is an harmonic potential. So when you have something like this, it's an harmonic potential. So they have described this stacking through this method. So it's a coarse-grained model, and it's a single coordinate model. Whether DNA can be modeled like this, they tried to model DNA like this by trying to understand certain things. The model did work qualitatively, and it gives a lot of information. So Velirainen and others, so they tried to get the thermal conductivity of DNA, and they got a thermal conductivity of 1.8 milliwatt per meter Kelvin. And then what they tried to see is this transition temperature. So what you see on the left side graph is actually the heat. So what you see before the transition, after the transition temperature given by the dashes, so you see the heat becoming constant in their work, and what you see at around transition in the heat capacity is that so it increases, the heat capacity increases, the reduced heat capacity, which is scaled by the Boltzmann constant, and it drops down after the transition temperature. So this temperature creates a ratio of thermal conductivity at temperatures lower than the transition temperature Tc and higher than the transition temperature Tc. So the transition temperature, as you can vividly see, is around 350 Kelvin from the heat capacity graph, and you can also see that from the heat graph where the heat becomes constant, mostly constant. So what is the ratio? So the ratio of tuning of thermal conductivity, where the thermal conductivity at higher temperatures and lower temperatures might be different. So the PBD model says that it's around 18. So we'll see whether, the paper claims that this is 18, around 18. So in another work, so the same group, what they do is they give different base pairs, they consider different base pairs, and so adenine is given by A, guanine is given by G. So when the whole set of DNA has just adenine, so you have a different heat at lower temperatures around 250 Kelvin, and different when the whole base pair is just composed of just guanine, it has a different heat. So when you mix sequences, they do have a different thing. So on the right side, you see the heat capacity. So what you see is that poly A, which is like a complete adenine sequenced DNA, has a different transition temperature, far lesser than the guanine base pairs. So adenine pairs with thymine. So when we mean poly A, we mean only the sequence on the left side of the DNA. So you know the complementary pair on the right side of the DNA. So when you have sequences mixed together, they might, so this transition temperature can also be controlled. That's what they are saying. So when you have like 200 sequences, initial 200 sequences of aDNA followed by 200 sequences of guanine, so you have two transition regions there in the inset. So this is what they are claiming. So you can tune this transition temperature, and this might serve in tuning the transition temperature and the tuning the ratio, which we discussed in the previous slide as well. So so this is again an extension of that thing. So where you see the R, which is the thermal conductivity ratio of the thermal conductivity kappa H given by the red line, and the ratio of the lower thermal conductivity given by the blue line. So, and R is just the ratio of these two, the red and the blue ones. And if you see across various base pairs, they say that the R is different, and then it increases as A2 and G2 are alternated. So 2 adenine and 2 guanine. So this created, I mean, excitement for me, and this is one such thing which motivated me to see whether such things happen as well. So when they also claim that kappa L in the right graph, so for 50 base pair sequences, length sequences, the adenine has higher heat carrying capacity than 200. So the kappa L tuning is different for 50 base pair and different for 200 base pair. So when kappa L is decreases, and you see immediately R increasing, right? So this is, I mean, they claim that, but nevertheless, the question is the base pairs are linked by harmonic potential. So we have to be very careful when we interpret these results, like whether, because they have chosen the Payard-Bishop model, which has taken the harmonic interactions, so which includes just harmonic interactions. Yeah. So the next thing is, so after these single coordinate models that we saw, what we see is a coarse-grained model where we see the base pairs being considered as one grain, and then the certain carbon groups considered as one grain, and the phosphate backbone considered as one grain. So what you see is the whole structure is being coarse-grained into a set of structures which model a set of things. So just for a clarification, you can model water as a single oxygen with 2 hydrogen atoms to get more clarity. And if you want to coarse grain it, you can take the whole water molecule as just a bead, as a single bead as well. So this is a coarse grained approach used in molecular dynamics. So the Savin and others, they wanted to compute the heat conductivity by coarse graining them. So what they say is they have used poly-G-DNA. So, and they compute the reduced heat capacity C on the right top, and then the thermal conductivity kappa, and then the density of states or the power density spectrum. So the power density spectrum is actually the contribution of the vibrational modes with respect to the frequency. So and they say that the thermal conductivity converges to 0.3 watt per meter Kelvin for a poly-G-DNA, and the blue curve denotes actually the classical heat capacity measured using molecular dynamics, and the red curve includes the density of spectrum contribution and gives the quantum heat capacities by taking in the frequencies as well. So there are two ways to calculate the heat capacity: a classical way which includes the fluctuation dispersion, and then you also include the contributions of the frequency of states, which is from the graph below, the third graph. So you see, what you see is that most modes are confined between 0 to 175. So which means like low frequency modes dominate. I mean, in terms of terahertz, this is around 5 terahertz, like 100 is around 3 terahertz, and 200 per centimeter is around 6 terahertz. So you see mostly these low frequency modes dominating, whereas in inorganic materials you'll see 10 terahertz and 20 terahertz things. In organic material, what you're seeing is a low, is a soft mode dominating. We also have created one result which is very similar to this. We'll discuss that later. So the experimental works on DNA were so when I started the literature review, what we see is that one of the initial works was a DNA gold composite. So what they do is they have 2 electrodes. They extrude lambda DNA fiber, which can be bought from Sigma Aldrich or a certain thing, lambda DNA. I mean, these can be extracted as fibers itself, and these are sold in market as fibers. So what they do is they they coat it with gold. I mean, because the measurement is a difficult process. DNA is an insulator, and thermal insulator as well, and electrical insulator as well, and like it's sometimes a conductor, but you won't get good measurement. So they use gold on the top. They put gold particles on the top of the DNA and try to get the thermal conductivity and the electrical conductivity of DNA. Whereas the thermal conductivity that they get is around 150 watt per meter Kelvin. So gold thermal conductivity is around 320. So what we see here is actually a contribution. A major contribution here is from gold, not just the DNA. So and what they say is that they get a Lorentz number of 3.6 into 10 power minus 4 watt ohm per Kelvin square. So they say that it's phonon dominated, not electron dominated. The Lorentz number is actually the ratio of the thermal conductivity to the product of the electrical conductivity and the temperature at which they are doing. Then these measurements are taken at room temperature. So what you see is mostly the thermal conductivity that they calculated is mostly from gold contribution. Many later authors, which we discussed in the previous works, also cite the same thing. So next we see some very interesting work, thesis of Zhu from Iowa University, and this is one of his paper. So what they do is they have two copper electrodes, and what they do is like they put two DNA buffers, buffer solution containing DNA, and then they use the tungsten tip to extrude the DNA, and then what they do is they coat it, they do a spin thing, and then they keep it in a freezer to to freeze the water molecules, surrounding water molecules, and it's called, I guess it's called deep freezing or vacuum freezing. So, and then they use vacuum to remove the water molecules, and what you get is a DNA fiber between the two electrodes, and this is an SEM image of that thing in that work. So, and the approach that they use is called a transient electrothermal technique. So, where if you keep on increasing the temperature of the DNA, what you get is an increase in the resistance. So, and you will have a voltage difference from the thing. So it's an indirect measurement. The voltage is an indirect measurement of the thermal conductivity. And again, here DNA is coated with gold. So it's an indirect measurement, and DNA is coated with gold. So there are two kinds of fibers that they use, which is like 0.5 weight percent DNA with 5% NaCl, and the other one is an equal proportion of DNA with sodium chloride. And salt, actually the phosphate backbone is negatively charged. So salt, the sodium ions create a positively charged interaction, keeping the solution neutral. So so what you see is like in the left figure, fiber 1 and fiber 2. So if you have more sodium chloride, so the fiber 1 has low thermal conductivity at lower temperatures, and fiber 2 with equal contributions of DNA and sodium chloride, you have a bit higher thermal conductivity. So as you go till to 320 Kelvin, it doesn't make a difference. Mostly the microfibers have thermal conductivity of 0.4 watt per meter Kelvin. And what do you mean by microfibers? The diameter of the fiber is in microns. So you also have the same work, the thesis work which is cited in the bottom, the thermal transport in DNA. It's the same work where the nanofibers, where the diameter is reduced considerably, you see the thermal conductivity becoming to 1.2 watt per meter Kelvin or something around this thing, and you see a drop in thermal conductivity beyond 240 to 80 Kelvin. So that's an important thing which I observed in this result. So we'll see another work, and keep all these in mind. We'll see how this affects. When we did certain calculations, how we were able to compare these things. So the next thing is a very interesting work by using scanning tunneling microscope. So what they do is they keep the DNA in a bag, and they try to get the electronic transport in DNA, understand the electronic transport in DNA. So the sequences that they use is like CG sequences, which are embedded between adenine and thymine. So the thing is, if you see in the bottom left figure, mostly the guanine sequences are hopping transport. So they will transport the electrons through them, through the base pairs, and the hopping happens and it goes like that. Whereas when you have a AT sequence, it behaves as a tunneling thing. So there is, you cannot have hopping there. So in the quantum regime, the transport cannot happen that easily. It acts as a barrier. So probably you would have read about how electrons tunnel through STM tips and all those things. So that's why the STM is being used here. So what they do is they introduce, so within CG3 sequence, so between CG, they introduced a AT tunneling sequences like this. So CG is hopping and AT is tunneling, as I mentioned before. So what they see is a different regime. So for the CG sequences inserted between A and T on the left side figure, you have an increase in the resistance, electrical resistance. These are electrical resistances. This has nothing to do with thermal conductivity, but these are electrical resistances. So whereas when you see, when you take the CG sequences and you have the AT sequences inserted in the second figure, you see a transition between tunneling and hopping. So where does this transition happen? It happens at two AT sequences, and when you insert more AT sequences, it doesn't make a difference. Even AT sequences will behave like hopping transport after a particular time. So it doesn't matter if you start inserting more AT sequences. So it doesn't mean that you will have a complete barrier or something. So that this thing is a very intriguing result. So in this paper, so they also get the Seebeck coefficient on the right figure. The S is the Seebeck coefficient. So when you see the complete CG sequences with the black line, what you see is that Seebeck coefficient is around flat or decreasing a bit. So whereas when you have introduced tunneling sequences, it increases till a point, till the point where their AT sequences are increased by a factor of 2, but then it drops after you start introducing more sequences and becomes more or less like plain classical hopping transport. So this was an interesting thing. So my question was whether this also affects the thermal conductivity. So here they were discussing the electrical thing. So I was interested in the thermal conductivity. So why I started this work? So first thing is the 1D dimensional PBD model fails quantitatively. It's a very good qualitative model which gives us transition, the nonlinear zipping, the mechanical pulling, certain things it shows, but you have to use it cautiously because the pair potential used might affect quantitatively the statistical average of the results that you get. So for example, they mentioned the R ratio, which is the ratio of the thermal conductivity at higher temperature and lower, the tuning ratio. This is called the tuning ratio. So if you use another model, Joux and Bibb-Dagley model, so RGB is very low. So how do you know that one model is right and the other model is right? So if you keep on adding a lot of harmonic sequences, very high length sequences tend to have a different behavior because you have used harmonic coupling between the base pairs. So whether you can use harmonic coupling is a question that has to be addressed properly. And all the past models, they have not included long-range Coulombic interactions as such in the DNA, the effect of any charges in the DNA. So full atomistic models did not exist before this work. So the experiments had an indirect measurement. So gold coated DNA or things like those. So some of them were very good. I mean, the second one, the thesis of Zhou, which we discussed with the micro and nanofibers, it did have a quantitative effect as well, the TET technique in which I had. But the first one where a lot of gold particles were coated, the thermal conductivity was around 150 watt per meter Kelvin, whereas computational work shows 0.3 watt per meter Kelvin. So again, as I mentioned earlier, is this possible? Whether DNA can be modeled using a set of harmonic oscillators, and you can consider it a linear chain of harmonic beats, whether it's possible, helical, whether so, yeah, as I mentioned it, this was there. So what is required is a relationship between topology and heat transport. So whether the energy dissipation happens through the backbone, whether the base pairs play a major role, whether what happens, and this understanding is needed. So that's why we did the work. So first thing is like the cluster. Let me introduce the cluster at the NMCAD lab. So it is a 10-node cluster with Intel Xeon E5 2697 with 64-bit processors. It has 10 nodes, as given here in the diagram, and like each node has 125 GB RAM. So these are connected by InfiniBand Mellanox switches with FDR technology. Now I think the advanced one is the XDR technology. So the Mellanox switch is shown in the bottom of the figure. So these switches are connected to an optical. These have optical switches, and all the clusters are all the nodes are connected by optical switches. So this is the cluster which he had used to create all the results in this work. So first thing is, let me go to directly to the work. So what we do is we consider a simple Drew Dickerson dodecamer, so which has a sequence of like this. So CG, CG, A, TT, CG, CG. So what we do is we use a DNA Amber OL15 potential. We create a 15 angstroms solvation shell, which is the DNA has to be surrounded by water. So we create a solvation shell of water to make sure that the image effects in molecular dynamics, you have periodic boundary conditions. So those are cut off as well. If we use 15 angstroms, most works use 15 angstrom solvation shell, and then we minimize initially the system by keeping the DNA fixed at a restraint of 500 kilocalorie per mole angstrom, and then we minimize the total water surrounding it using 5,000 steps of steepest descent and subsequently conjugate gradient. And then what we do is, once the water is minimized energetically using the potential, and the water is modeled by tip 3p potential, so that's given in the second point. So we release the DNA slowly into water by removing the restraint, and the DNA is also minimized, and now the total system is in a minimized energy. So usually molecular dynamics simulations begin with minimizing your system. Energy minimization of begins with the energy minimization of your systems. So next, what we do is we have to propagate the system through time. So we have a time step of 0.1 femtosecond, and the thing is, like, we are going to calculate thermal conductivity. So when the DNA rotates in the water, when you are going to take a flux in a particular direction, how sure can you be that the DNA is in an upright position? So we apply a small restraint of 1 kilocalorie per mole angstrom to prevent the DNA moving, and the other things are not an issue. So this small restraint will just keep the DNA upheld, and then we measure the heat fluxes. So another thing is DNA has hydrogen bonds, so not H2 actually, hydrogen bonds. So HH bonds, or the CG has triple hydrogen bonds, or so DNA in itself, the certain sugar groups have hydrogen. So to prevent the hydrogen is a lighter molecule. So to prevent the hydrogen molecules from affecting the stability of the system, there is something called a shake constraint. So which will make sure that the hydrogen bonds do not affect the time step of the simulation. So we can go ahead with that, with such a time step. So lighter atoms affect the stability of a molecular dynamics simulation. So hydrogen bonds are given by shake constraints. Then we use a Nuse-Hoover thermostat, which is an extended Lagrangian thermostat, and we equilibrate the system for 10 nanosecond at room temperature and with a coupling constant of 100 time steps. Yes, sir.
Vignesh, we lost you for a few seconds, so can you just repeat from the beginning of this slide?
Okay, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first thing is we use a time step of 0.1 femtosecond. So as we are measuring the thermal conductivity, which is a directional property, we prevent the rotation of DNA by using a small restraint of 1 kilocalorie per mole angstrom, and then to prevent the hydrogen atoms, the lighter hydrogen atoms, affecting the stability of the system, because the lighter atoms tend to have higher vibrational frequencies. So we use shake constraint, which will constrain such bonds, and we have a tolerance of 10 power minus 4 such that we can use 1 femtosecond, 0.1 femtosecond as a time step. So then what we use is a Nusselt-Hover thermostat, and we equilibrate the system at room temperature 300 Kelvin. So actually we equilibrate at 300 Kelvin for 100 time steps. So the coupling constant should be is 0.1 picosecond, and then we bring the whole system to room pressure. So we use a Nusselt-Hover barostat, and again 10 nanosecond we equilibrate the system, and we see that the system is stable. If you keep it at 300 Kelvin, the DNA and the water molecules are fine. There is no, breaking of the DNA, water molecules flying away, nothing like that. The system is stable. We see that the system is stable, and then we start our measurement. So, and for a barostat, you have 1000 time steps, which is around 1 picosecond. So then we have to discuss the two methods that we have used. The Green-Kubo equilibrium formalism, which takes the correlation of the heat autocorrelation given by J, and it measures. What it does is this formalism gives us the thermal conductivity kappa. So this is a formalism given in 1960s itself by Green and Kubo. So and if you want to get separate directional one, the factor 3 goes away. And what you have here, V is the volume of the atoms, volume occupied by the DNA atoms. So, and EI is the energy of the atom. So which is the potential energy after you have minimized the system, where you are not imparting velocities into the system, and then you have VI, where you have the velocity of the atom at a particular temperature. After we start equilibrating the system, and at a particular temperature you will get VI, and then sigma I is the virial stress, which is the product of the force and the velocity of the atom. So, and Vi is the velocity of the atom. So what you get is the heat flux J through this approach, and then what you do is a autocorrelation of this heat flux, and then you integrate it over a long period of time. Here typically it's infinity, but you can numerically you can see whether it subsides to a particular value. So so this is how the Green-Kubo method works. We'll come to we'll see the results, like how it subsides, the thermal conductivity converges. So for the volume of DNA, we have a question. Can we model it by using a cylinder? Is it possible by keeping the DNA to have a cross section as a cylinder and then model it? So how can we have the volume of DNA known? So crystallography approaches have already given the volume of DNA. So the base pairs are already known in angstrom cube. So adenine, so for the bDNA, it's around 136.1, and for subsequent things, for a per base pair, you have all these values. So when you start putting the values here, and you also should take in the complementary base pair values, so you will get the total volume of the Drew-Dickerson sequence to be 7326 angstrom cube. So these are atomic volumes, full atomic volumes. So here you see on the left side that if you keep the DNA for 20 nanoangstrom and start measuring the flux, what you will get is initially an increase in flux, and then you will start the flux subsiding at around 300 Kelvin. So you have a convergence of a particular point here. So if you start taking the average beyond 15 nanosecond to 20 nanosecond, what you have is a time averaged value for one simulation. So in the second figure, what we see is the thermal conductivity along the length of the DNA. So for different temperatures, as you see, it increases initially, and then it starts dropping after 300 Kelvin, and at 350 Kelvin and 400 Kelvin starts becoming same. So what you see in the third figure is the in Green-Kubo method, you can calculate the fluxes in any direction once you keep the DNA in particular direction. So what you see is more heat is going through the base pairs then along the DNA length. So this is also an intriguing result, but nevertheless around 350 Kelvin it drops again. So this confirms the results with the previous works. The thermal conductivity drops at around 350 Kelvin, and so we will come later. So we use another method. So we don't believe that the Green-Kubo is giving us the right values. So we use another method called the Muller-Platte method, which is a non-equilibrium MD method. So why is it called non-equilibrium? what it does is it swaps the velocities between the atoms. So you create a lot of swaps in the water box, in the cuboidal water box containing the DNA, and you start swapping the velocities of water as well as DNA. So such that what happens is we have a heat flux and a thermal gradient as a response. So so the middle chunk will become hot over time, will have higher temperature over time, and the corner chunks will have lower temperature or cold junctions over time. So if you have a periodic system, you should divide the thermal conductivity given in the formula by 2. So if you have an aperiodic system, you should remove that 2. If you have a finite system, so it depends on the boundary conditions as well, what you compute. So T high and T low, and that's what, yeah. So this is what the non-equilibrium method is. There exists other non-equilibrium methods as well, but this seemed to be better for this problem, so I chose this problem. So what you see is a thermal gradient set up in the surrounding water as well as the DNA. The left top figure is the thermal, this is the temperature gradient across water. So as you see, like from 100 Kelvin to 400 Kelvin, you have a temperature gradient setup. 1 second, yeah. So the right bottom figure has the DNA thermal gradient. So we choose the DNA atom separately and the water atom separately, and we see how the temperature gradient differs. So what we see is the convergence within 1 nanosecond of a particular thermal conductivity value. So what we see is a similar trend, similar to green Kubo, and what we see is a drop in thermal conductivity after 350 Kelvin here. So this is in green Kubo method we had 1.5 or something. Here we have around 1.2 or something. So the next thing is the density of states. So which we saw in the Savin work previously. We told that mostly low frequency modes operate even at any temperature. So they mentioned the that the low frequency modes, they calculated it only at 300 Kelvin. We see the density of states at 3 different temperatures. What we see is that the frequency of operation doesn't change a lot, but the density of states which affect in the inset, you have the probability increasing a lot. So and the density of states is given by this formula, where C of t is nothing but the velocity autocorrelation. You see, for calculating thermal conductivity, we used heat autocorrelation. For getting the density of states, we have the velocity autocorrelation. So and the harmonic oscillator frequencies are given by this thing, and you can also calculate the entropy and subsequently the heat capacity from these density of states. And using the frequency, nu is the frequency, beta is 1 by kBt, T is the temperature, Kb is the Boltzmann constant, and so Kq, ln Q is the partition function in statistical mechanics. So you can get the entropy and the heat capacity. So by differentiating the entropy, so we get the entropy, we get the heat capacity of entropy as well as the heat capacity. Entropy, we are not plotting the entropy. We are interested in the heat capacity at the moment. So we are getting the heat capacity of the total DNA. What we see is so on the left bottom figure we get for water, so which is subsiding at around 60 or something. So if you see, the value for water is around 74 at 300 Kelvin, whereas the 2.2 phase model which you use is subsiding at 60 joule per mole per Kelvin for water on the left bottom figure. On the right top figure we calculate for DNA. So where we see, I mean for the whole DNA, if you want a reduced thing, we have to divide by the total number of molecules and divide by the gas constant. We'll have what you call a reduced heat capacity as in the previous works. So what you see is several peaks in the thing. So you have a peak at around 150 Kelvin. So when you use the density of states in the previous work, so the last density of states is around 700 to 800. So you can calculate the D by temperature from that. So we calculate it to be around 165 Kelvin. So when you compute it between 700 and 800. So whereas here from the heat capacity itself we get qualitatively 150 Kelvin. So we also calculated it from the last density of states. So what you see is again transition temperature in a small regime. So which is shown in the inset here. So indeed, we are having a transition at around 350 to 360 Kelvin. So for this sequence, so this was published before, and then now we have the second publication, the effect of base pair sequences on DNA thermal conductivity. So we now use just the non-equilibrium molecular dynamics, or the Muller-Platte scheme of swapping velocities and hence the kinetic energies between the boxes. So we use that method. So since we see that it's effective in the first work itself, so and it sets up a good gradient, so we use it here as well. So we use 100 chunks in the water box. We choose just the DNA molecules for getting the temperature gradient across DNA, and we a gradient like this is set up. So so the blue regions are in the chunks 1 and around 1 to 50, or in the chunks below 15, and like the hot region is in the center region around the chunk 50. So on either sides you will have the cold regions. So one thing is important in few works, they discuss the anomalous heat conduction and the anomalous diffusion in one-dimensional systems. So why is this required? See, previous models describe DNA as a single bead spring system of coarse graining. They did a coarse graining by using a 1D set of harmonic oscillators. So we have to see, because such theoretical works show that there are several regimes possible in a 1D thing. So del x square is the mean square displacement, and d is the diffusion constant, and t is the time for diffusion. So if we have alpha 1, what you have is a normal or Fourier diffusion. So if you have alpha as 2 from the perspective of diffusion on the left side, so you have a ballistic transport. When you have alpha greater than 1 but less than 2, what you have is called a super diffusion. This is in a set of harmonic oscillators. So when you have alpha less than 1, so what you have is called subdiffusion. So from the thermal conductivity perspective, this translates to the length of the chain. So the thermal conductivity kappa is proportional to the length of the chain power beta. So in normal thing, it's like it is independent of the length. So in normal diffusion, so beta is 0. Whereas when you have the thermal conductivity diverging as the length of the 1D chain, so it becomes ballistic. So beta and alpha are related by the formula given in the first line. So 2 minus 2 by alpha. So when you have beta greater than 0 and less than 1, what you have is a situation called superdiffusion. So in beta less than 0, what you have is something called subdiffusion. Many works claim that in carbon nanotubes or boron nitride nanotubes, inorganic materials, there is a superdiffusion regime, and they say that Fourier law is being broken there. The question is whether DNA, which is a natural helical tube, does it have such kind of nature there? Savin et al. Already says in his work, a coarse grain model which we saw in one computational work, already mentions that the thermal conductivity converges for poly-G sequence. So whether that is possible is what we are going to study in this paper. So again, we have the thermal conductivity converging along the length of DNA. I mean, within 5 nanoseconds, we choose a particular regime where we can average out the thermal conductivity, take a time average, and we plot the points on the right side figure. So what we have is for poly A sequence, as we increase the number of base pairs, the thermal at 300 Kelvin, the thermal conductivity almost, converges. We didn't know whether it converges till 40 base pair. That's why we took another point at 80 base pair. Whereas for poly G and poly CG sequences, we knew that they are converging pretty well by fitting using a converging function. We saw that it's fitting pretty well. For poly A and poly T, we were not sure. So we took two more simulations at 80 base pairs, which took us around 1 week. So I mean, if we start increasing the in a full scale model, if you start increasing the number of base pairs, the number of water molecules surrounding it will increase, and everything will increase, and it's computationally difficult to do it as well. So at around 80 base pairs, we did it for poly and poly T. So we found for poly A, it starts converging bit more or less around 0.9 watt per meter Kelvin. For poly AT, this value is around beta value, which we saw in the previous slide, is around 0.13. I mean, it's not in the anomalous region where it's greater than 1 by 3, 0.33. It's very close to 0. So we don't believe that DNA has a anomalous thermal conductivity and it breaks Fourier law or something. Such a small DNA, even it does not do that. So we believe that it does not do that from our works. I mean, we see that it's converging. So when we get the, what we have on the left side is the thermal conductivity as a function of temperature along the strand length. At a particular strand length, we took it at around 28 base pair. So what we see is two regimes where the thermal conductivity increases till a particular temperature and then starts decreasing. So the scattering mechanisms are very similar to what you see in inorganic materials as well. So initially you have a different kind of scattering, then after it reaches the peak temperature or peak thermal conductivity, you have the phonon-phonon scattering or something also dominating. So this big drop in thermal conductivity after a particular point is also very significant. I mean, you have it in a very short regime. So for inorganic materials, you used to see it in a very long regime. So this increase and decrease in thermal conductivity where that scattering mechanisms differ. So on the right side, what we have is we took the same CG sequences embedded between two adenine and thymine sequences. You remember the scanning tunneling microscopy work where electrical conductivity is calculated. We take the thermal conductivity here. We generate these sequences and we see that the thermal conductivity is also like goes and then settles down similar to the poly A, poly AT sequences which you saw on the previous slide as we keep on increasing. Whereas when we have small tunneling sequences till 82, we see that the thermal conductivity is increasing. The lattice thermal conductivity. So it's increasing till 80 is 2. So for 12 base pairs. So if 80 is 2, it's 12 base pair on the x-axis scale. Whereas when you start increasing the 80 more than 2, when you put 80 80 A or 80 80 in 3 times 80, what we see is actually a convergence of thermal conductivity as you increase the number of base pairs. So a similar paradigm as you see in the electrical transport happens also in the thermal transport. So and again when you take the electrical thermal conductivity values and compute the electrical thermal conductivity, these are all in the orders of 10 power minus 3 watt per meter Kelvin, whereas what we have is 1000 orders higher than the lattice thermal conductivity. So what we compute is actually nothing but the lattice or phonon thermal conductivity. So which is the dominating factor here and not the electrical thermal conductivity. So that's it for the DNA work. So that was the second publication. So here are few conference works which I would like to discuss. So this was one conference which we presented and we got the we tried to get the phonon dispersion and the thermal conductivity of a single boron nitride thing. So what we use is a code called quantum espresso, which uses the density functional perturbation theory, where the PBE functionals are used with the GPOP potential. PB means a Purdue, name of the people who invented the functional, Purdue, Buchenhoff, Ersenhoff functional, and GPOP is actually projector. The term, these are jargons used in DFT, so it's the projector augmented wave method. So and what is we get this dispersion curve at different grid points in the Fourier region, K points. So what you have on the x-axis, gamma point, K, kappa, gamma K, M gamma points, these are all crystal symmetry zones in the Fourier region or the reciprocal space. So and you get a grid, you take a grid of 8 bar 8 bar 1 and you get you use a wave function cutoff and a charge density cutoff where the things are converged, the SCF converges, and you get the phonon dispersion curves like this. So ZA is actually, TA is actually the transverse acoustic mode of how this phonon dispersion occurs through the boron nitride layer. So LA is the longitudinal acoustic mode, ZA is the flexural acoustic mode out of the plane mode, and O modes are the ZO or LO ATO modes are the optical modes, which are the high frequency optical modes. These are the low frequency sound modes, and also LO are the longitudinal optics, so transverse optics and flexural optical modes. We also get the thermal conductivity at 300 Kelvin for a boron nitride boron nitrate, thin sheet of boron nitrate with a length of 120 nanometer with a width of 10 nanometer. So we compare it with previous works and we find it very close to each other. So this was a conference work. So next thing was since we see the atomic arrangement affecting the several thermal conductivity and several other properties, we also see that such kind of nature occurs in inorganic materials as well. So what we see is called a max phase alloy, titanium 3 silicon carbide max phase alloy, where you will have 3 layers of titanium and then you have a single layer of silicon given by the blue atom, and then like 2 layers of carbon. So that's why it's called 312. So you will have other phases as well, where you will have two phases of 2 layers of titanium given by the red balls with a single carbon atom between them, and you will have then have another silicon atom below and above. These are sandwiched between 2 atoms like these, and what you see is such materials are behaving like intermetallic ceramics and might be useful in creation of turbine blade materials. So we try to get the thermal conductivity of such materials, or we try to understand the nature of such materials. So we use again a PB-Sol power pseudopotential, and we use a set of grid points in the reciprocal space for getting the we do these calculations in quantum espresso, which is a density functional theory calculation. We cut off the wave function for these functionals at 52 Rydberg. Rydberg is a unit of energy similar to electron volt or something. So when we have a charge density cutoff as well, and we use phonopy for getting the phonon density vibrational modes. So what we get is the first is the electronic dispersion, or the electronic band structure of titanium silicon carbide. What you see is that the Fermi energy level, their valence states are above the Fermi energy level. So here, so what you see is that it's having metallic nature as well. It's a ceramic and it has a metallic nature as well. So, and the second thing is the phononic dispersion, second diagram. So you have high frequency modes around 20 terahertz as well. These are the phonon modes, and the bottom one are the acoustic modes. And what you see is the carbon is given by the red. So carbon is lighter among the atoms. So the carbon is contributing to the phonon modes a lot. And then what you have is silicon given by the green, contributing to the low frequency modes. And the titanium, which is bonded to silicon, will have a different vibrational mode than the titanium bonded to the carbon. So titanium around carbon will have a higher mode, and the titanium bonded to silicon will be having a blue, denoted by the blue, will have a lower mode. So I mean, these are the results, and we also can get the heat capacity for this material at different temperatures. What you see is that it has a good heat capacity. So these results were actually published in a previous work in 2010, and my results were comparable to those results. And these were, I just validated, I tried to see how these results are comparable to the already published work. So these max phase alloys are very useful. We'll see in the outlook and conclusion. So what we assume is that the helical structures, DNA, only what we see is that we think is that only organic materials can form a helical structure. What we have here is an inorganic helix formed by phosphorus and lithium. So, and this is a theoretical calculation saying that these structures are stable. So next is a synthesized double helix formed by sodium, iodine and phosphate. So what we have is again a double helix here, and this material has been synthesized. So so inorganic structures do exist as well. So so we can extend such thinking to inorganic materials as well. So so regarding the thermal switching, so what we see is heat transport happening through the backbone as well as the base pairs. So before the transition temperature, heat travels, energy transports travels through both the base pair, along the base pair and along the base strand as well. So I mean, there is a competition between in which direction the energy transport has to happen. So this can be useful in creating thermal switching approaches. So you can use it as a thermal diode, a regulator, where you see tungsten doped vanadium oxide, an inorganic material, showing such transition in thermal conductivity below and above the transition temperature. So you also can have a smooth transition as like this as well. So as I said, like we are at the moment we are coating zirconium oxide on the top of nickel superalloys in the turbine blades. So we have to protect the heat from reaching the turbine blades, whereas the max phase ceramics might help us in increasing the operational temperatures by around 300 degrees Celsius. I mean, by 200 to 300, they are very stable at those temperatures, it seems. And other max phase ceramics can also be there. Like, you need not have titanium silicon carbide. You can have chromium silicon carbide or chromium aluminum carbide or other materials as well. So I mean, one such paper has been published very recently, last year. So you can have, instead of titanium, other transition metals as well. And instead of silicon, aluminum, silicon, aluminum, or something else as well. Yeah. So, and carbon or nitrogen. So you can have for the third material, carbonate. So these ternary alloys are very interesting. These are ceramics as well as this thing. So in this thing we can use the max phase alloys as well. Nevertheless, we should ask ourselves whether the approach in dividing the energy where DNA behaves can also be seen in some inorganic materials at such higher temperatures. So this is a question that we should pose as well. So this was a very recent work. I found it, very similar to my work. So they also use the non-equilibrium molecular dynamics method. So what they do is they have AIB, amino isobutyric acid polypeptide. So they call it AIB. They disperse this polymer in chloroform, and they see, like, they have a lot of conformers, and they see the helical content. They cluster the polymer groups or the polypeptides by using the helical content. So you have mostly a lot of helical content. There might be content given by green thing which are very random as well. So they will form a complete helix or a hairpin kind of configuration, or a completely random configuration given by the blue circles with low helical content. So they are clustering all these conformers, and they are trying trying to understand the biomolecular energy transport, because it is only in organic matter that the energy transport is a bit efficient. So the understanding of this energy transport is very important. So what they see is that there are two diffusion regimes. So one below 270 Kelvin and one above 290 Kelvin. So the authors say, this is one very interesting quote. While a ballistic pathway exists, the majority of energy transport is nonetheless diffusive. So we discussed in the second paper that normal Fourier law applies, and there is no anomalous transport in DNA. This actually, this statement from these authors also confirms that, is another assurance that diffusive nature is more predominant, not the ballistic nature or anomalous nature. And most of the heat transport is also through the backbone or the strands. So another statement from this paper is a much interesting one. Helical conformers propagate heat more readily than a full ensemble, which is like the randomly oriented conformers transport heat less efficiently. So this is a statement which was very interesting as well from this molecular dynamics simulation work. So these are the publications which are discussed in this colloquium, and yeah. So I've given the DOI of the publication, which has been recently accepted. Still the volumes have not been assigned. So let's, I would like to acknowledge a few people. Professor Dr. Dinesh Kumar Harusampath. I thank him for allowing independent thinking and for enabling me to continue research at IISc for the past 4 years. So, and I thank Professor Prabal Maiti for introducing this topic to me, and when I went to him and asked him about thermal conductivity, and introducing me to the world of soft matter as well. There are I mean, now I see a lot of other simulations with respect to thermophoresis as well, colloids, and a lot of things as well. I am reading a lot of papers in that direction as well, and it's actually opening a new world for me as well. And I thank Dr. Navanitha Krishnan and Abhishek for fruitful discussions on the first publication. So Dr. K.R.V. Simha has been a motivating factor for a lot of students. He has played a role in elevating the atmosphere wherever he enters. So, and I thank Dr. Roy Mahapatra and Dr. S. Gopalakrishnan for changing my perspective on logic and research. And I'm indebted to a lot of my friends. I mean, Dr. Satyanarayana, who finished his PhD at Aalto University, he's been my school friend. We discuss regularly on a lot of issues with respect to research, and I thank him a lot. I mean, Nitin Balaji, who has been in my previous research group, I thank him as well. Then I thank Ramesh Babu and Ramji, with whom I went through a lot of trips outside IISc, and I thank them for their moral support. I thank my father, V.S. Mahalingam, and my mother, Usha Mahalingam, for allowing me to think independently and analyze the world critically. I mean, that's something that should start from the family. That's my opinion. And I thank the mysterious intelligence who fiddles around in everyone's life. Thank you. And these are the references. Yeah. Any questions? So I'd like to know if you have any questions at any junction. Yeah.
There are no questions in the chat box, so please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. Oh, there is one.
Okay. Yeah, please give your questions in the chat box, or just unmute your mic and let me know.
Maybe Vignesh, I have a name question. I'm Mahipal.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, nice work. Congratulations on your papers. Nice work. The question is that, so you are using high temperatures, right, when you are measuring thermal conductivity. So you think you're measuring the conductivity through the double helical structure or the melted DNA? Because when you are heating up the DNA melts. So basically, double strand DNA becomes two single strand DNAs around 60-70 degrees centigrade, depending on the length, of course. When you are using Dodecamere, 12 base pairs, right, I would expect that to melt around 40 degrees or so. 35-40 degrees, it should already start to melt.
Yeah.
So the measurements, the thermal conductivity, you think you're measuring through the double helical structure itself, or two single strand DNA parallel to each other?
What I do is I choose the DNA molecule separately. In a Green-Kubo method, what I do is I try to get just the flux in the perpendicular direction and the flux along the base pair direction in terms of Green-Kubo thermal conductivity. So I think I'm measuring the flux through the total DNA in Green-Kubo method. So any other question? I mean, because this is like, so you were mentioning 60 degrees, right? 60 degrees it melts around.
Right. So you said Dodecamere, right? This DNA is
so around which is around 330 Kelvin or 340 Kelvin, right?
Yeah, 330 Kelvin, right? Yeah, 270.
Yeah, 330 or
340. You think in degree centigrade?
Yeah.
330.
Yeah. It's around 330, 340 Kelvin. Yeah.
That's where the DNA start to melt, especially the 12 base pairs.
Yeah, denaturation occurs at that region. Yes, that's what I was trying to speak as using terms of critical temperature. Yeah. So if you use the
Vignesh, you would also want to mention the role of the medium water in this.
Yes. So thing is like if you the medium is it's surrounded by water as well. So the tip 3p water and the surrounding sodium ions, all these interactions are taken care of by the amber OL15 potential. So we do a complete a complete full-scale interaction simulation, and we just choose the heat flux through the DNA, and we separate the heat flux through the DNA and water, and we separate. Separate the thermal gradient setup across DNA and water. We use two groups of atoms. So you saw on the last slide another work where chloroform AAB peptide is in chloroform as well, right? Similar way. Right. Yeah. So we separate the DNA contribution separately. The water just acts as a stabilizing medium. So when you set up a temperature, what I do is I set up a temperature across both water and DNA, whereas the thermal gradient which is being set up will differ according to the molecules in the DNA and the water, right? So the thermal gradient differs. The heat transferred in the non-equilibrium MD method remains essentially the same.
And
yeah.
Another question, maybe if I can ask.
So
it's not really a question.
Yeah, I mean, if you just take, I mean, what I do is I just take along the length direction the thermal gradient, along the length direction. I tend to check the only along the length direction of the total DNA. I mean, probably we have to separate the backbone contribution, the base pair contribution. We probably have, that is something that I'm not doing now. But my feeling is that mostly the heat goes through the backbone only, not through base pairs, because in the second work which you saw, most if you use any DNA, mostly the thermal conductivity is almost one and the same. So if you saw in the right figure, so what you see is it's almost one and the same for a homogeneous sequence. A non-homogeneous sequence might differ, but for a homogeneous sequence, you almost see the same thermal conductivity. Yeah.
Yeah, along the same lines, you think you can measure? I mean, I think obviously you can measure, because since you're measuring on the double-strand DNA, can you measure on the single-strand DNA? It's just to see the correlation, like, because if you have a melting of the DNA with the high temperatures, you should be able to probably see or compare these two.
Yeah, I mean, what we can do is actually we can separate the fluxes or the thermal gradient contribution due to backbone, and then due to base pairs as well. We have to see that and see how much the contribution of how much is the contribution of backbone and how much is the contribution of these base pair stacking. So that has to be separated as well. I have not done that, but we have to see how that happened, because that decides how the energy dynamics or the competition between the heat in these two directions are, which is very important, right? So you are right, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Vignesh, and great work again. Congratulations.
Yeah. Any other question? Sir?
Yeah, so Vignesh, thank you very much. Professor Ganji, also thank you very much. It's kind of a new area for our lab, so most of the other attendees being from different areas probably don't have any pertinent questions on this. Nonetheless, it's really kind of all of them to have joined this colloquium. So I thank everybody, and we'll probably bring this to a conclusion. Vignesh, you have something to say?
Yeah, I also thank everyone for making it to this colloquium. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.